Hello and welcome to episode 69, season 12 of the Fighting Cock podcast, joined today by the Athletics' very own Charlie Eccleshare. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, how are you?
You're on loads of podcasts as well. Do you know what? I'm sick of there's podcasts everywhere. Take me back to the day when we started, when there were 2 Spurs podcasts. Now we have to contend with The View from the Lane. How are we supposed to do that?
I know, it is it's a crowded marketplace, isn't
Yes.
it? Football pods in general. Yeah, I know, it's funny because like most of the pods I do are taking a summer break.
Yeah.
So it's like I needed to get my fix, and this is the second podcast I've done this week, as if I'm like I'm addicted. I have to record a minimum of 2 podcasts every week.
I know, it's amazing. Football Cliches, View from the Lane, and Totally Football Show. You can find Charlie on. I've got to do this because, we started the last podcast. You were here with us a year ago. Ruben Bin says, does he eat all his Eccles cake by himself, or does he Eccles share? You don't have to answer. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so about a year ago, you came on the Fighting Cock. We, as fans, were really excited. We spoke about the possible title challenge, overloading the opposition. Obviously, towards the end of the season before, we were killing teams, 5-4-0s, all over the place. Final game of the season, just demolished the relegated Norwich. But it all went wrong, as is the Tottenham way. It all went wrong. What, in your best estimation, and based on the information you have, what happened with Conte?
Yeah, I know. It's amazing the contrasts from a year ago and how wrong we got it, but how wrong everyone got it.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking as if Spurs, third was basically the position most people were going for, and there was talk of maybe they could push the title. Where did it go wrong? I think there was a growing disconnect between him and the players. I think that his kind of abrasive manner worked early on. I think it was just what the team needed. I think they tired of it. I think also there were a lot of factors. I mean, you think the start of last season, they got top 4 when they weren't playing midweek games, and Conte even said that was a massive factor. Then all of a sudden they weren't just playing midweek games, but it was the most constricted schedule we'd basically ever had leading up to the World Cup. And they managed to sort of muddle their way through. Like, results were weirdly okay. I mean, I think they were 4th going into that World Cup break, and they'd been 3rd for a reasonable amount of time in those early months, but performances weren't very good. I think then by the time they came back, the uncertainty about his future, I think that's just such a huge thing that maybe we didn't quite realize how big a deal that is when your manager's off really at the end of the season, like consciously or otherwise. Is that really something you as a player can fully believe in and commit to? Then obviously he had his illness. We should say as well, soft factors. I know sometimes because football now is so data driven and so data led, we like harder explanations, but he lost a number of his close friends over the course of that season. I think the death of Ventrone was a really big thing that maybe from the outside people don't realize. He was really, really popular at the club, and someone Conte had worked with for years. So I think, as ever with these things, there's not one reason. I think all of those things combined, and that's why Conte, and it all led to that point at Southampton where Conte exploded essentially.
Yeah, indeed. So it's pretty much what we already knew, that these are a combination of factors that led to a position where, like you say, Conte exploded and then the writing was on the wall. But he did mention about, and it was a comment he kind of reversed on to some degree, but he mentioned about Daniel Levy and his role at the club and the fact that has been very little success in 20 years. And Mourinho, not long after that, talked about his fondness for every club that he'd been to, but had no real connection with Tottenham, and called it Daniel Levy's club. What do you make of that? I mean, is Daniel Levy the problem? And regardless of what happens, we're always sort of destined to be last of the big 6.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I think it slightly depends on your perspective, because those who are anti-Levy, of which it's probably fair to say there's an increasing number, feel that he is the obstacle, that he's almost taken the club as far as he can. The other view is that you look at where Spurs were when he came in 20 odd years ago. They were sort of in that middling pack with Villa, Everton, clubs like that. And you look at the direction that Villa and Everton have gone. And obviously, Villa are resurgent now, but they've spent years in the Championship, and Everton obviously doing what they're doing. And I'm not saying that Spurs should be compared to those clubs. But, to get him into that top six, to get them regular top fours, if you zoom out, clearly it would be unfair to say it's been all bad because they're in a much stronger position than what they were. I think the issue that a lot of people have is the sense that there's been too much of a focus on things like infrastructure, the training ground, and the stadium. But again, those things do future-proof Spurs to a certain extent because of, certainly with the stadium, the revenues they bring in. And the training ground, it's funny because as much as I know fans sort of roll their eyes at that because it feels like such an intangible thing, it is funny because a manager like Conte, that was something he really liked about Spurs was the training ground. The facilities are amazing.
Yeah.
So just to sort of, I don't know, explain that there are some tangible benefits. It's not just this thing that's trotted out by people defending Levy. I mean, clearly from what Mourinho said, there was an issue there. I mean, Mourinho and Levy generally got on pretty well, but obviously the way it ended, Mourinho brings up at every possible opportunity. So he's maybe not the most reliable narrator about Levy. And then Conte, again, just the contrast with this time a year ago, because this time a year ago, Levy was saying that, Conte was, one of the best managers he'd worked with, was so impressed by him. I think everyone at Spurs was really impressed by Conte this time a year ago. But obviously it didn't then work out. And you could say the common denominator is Daniel Levy. And that's why I think it's so interesting what will happen now with Scott Munn coming in, how much, that does herald a new era where Daniel Levy takes more of a back seat. But again, we've kind of been here before because people were saying that about Fabio Paratici. And while, yes, Paratici did obviously have a very prominent role, the Conte appointment was led by Levy still, even though Paratici was there as the director of football, whereas ordinarily you'd think the director of football would be leading on that. So it's complicated. I guess partly because I'm a journalist and my job is to provide balance. And my nature is to sort of see both sides. I don't think he's quite as terrible as some make out, but at the same time, I do think clearly mistakes have been made. I think two things can be true at once. That he's, of course, in many ways he's done some good things, he's done some bad things, and I think there have been times where you just wanted that Spurs to make that push. You think of that 2018-19 period. And it didn't happen, and I think that will always be a regret for Spurs fans.
Yeah, for sure, and you're right. There is it isn't a binary of saying he's good or bad. I think the major moments, in those clutch moments where we have to make a decision and to push on his decision making in players that needed to be signed or managers that needs to be brought in, he more or less, I'd say, he gets those big decisions incorrect. And will not put his foot on the gas when it appears that we need to. But maybe, eventually he'll get it right. And I was just wondering what you thought of Postecoglou and whether or not that's a gamble or whether that's a shrewd move. I think the overriding, we were talking before we started, is that the actual interest in Tottenham has gone through the roof since Postecoglou come through the door. Maybe in part because we don't know much about him other than what we've seen at Celtic. But before that, an unknown. But there seems to be a fascination around this guy. Is that fascination just a curiosity, or is there a genuine excitement, in your opinion, about what we can expect from Postecoglou?
I'm excited. I wrote a big piece on him when he joined, and as part of that was interviewing former players of his, former coaches who'd worked with him, even people who'd been his superiors, the kind of not quite Levy level, but, directors, so as to get the kind of most rounded sense of him possible. And the reports were so glowing, and not just in a kind of platitudes kind of way, which because most managers who come in, they're going to be top managers, so of course they're going to have people who will vouch for them. But these were really, the way that his former players spoke about him was almost like cult-like how highly they rated him. And it reminded me of I've spoken to players who worked with Mourinho when he was at Porto and in that first Chelsea spell. It's a kind of a similar thing. Like, he was held in such high regard. They just fully trusted him. And that's what Postecoglou those kind of feelings he engenders from his players and from the supporters as well. Like you talk to Celtic fans, and I spoke to a few and people who cover Celtic, both after he joined and before, and they were so gutted about him going. And you know what it's like when with Pochettino, that how angry it would make you if other clubs were trying to get him. It was like, no, leave our guy alone. Like, he's ours. Yeah. And that's how they felt. So no, I think there is real excitement because, he's an evangelist. He really does have a way of playing that is so, some of the things he said about how committed he is to playing in an attacking way, et cetera, are almost verbatim what a lot of Spurs fans, especially the more traditional fans, say. Like, we much better to, try and play attacking football than grind out 1-0s. And not every fan will agree with that. But I think, looking at some of the Spurs' core principles, and the big buzzword this summer was culture, about changing the culture, improving the culture at the club, I think he'll do all of those things. And there's no guarantee about results necessarily, but I don't think, Conte and Mourinho were supposedly sure bets, and the results were okay. They were good in part, but they didn't transform the club. So I think it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm excited. I can't wait to see us playing some attacking football for the first time in 3 years. Honestly, we did a poll. I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast. We did a poll, and there was 4 options. One, actually, we borrowed someone else's poll, I should say, because he'll be listening to this game. It wasn't you. But we borrowed this guy's poll, and it was 4 options, and the winner was, we just want to see attractive football in the first instance. What do you think success looks like? So there was 1 in 10 that said we've got to win something. We kind of, that's ridiculous to say we have to win something this season for it to be a success for Postecoglou. But what do you think success looks like for Postecoglou?
Yeah, this is such an interesting question. Again, this came up when I was doing that Postecoglou piece and talking to players, and I was asking them, do you think Postecoglou will be a success? And they'd often say that, but what is a success for Spurs right now? Because they do feel like a club in transition. I don't know about long term. I think just looking ahead to next season, and yeah, some will say this is an unambitious attitude, but I think what's most important right now is that by the end of next season and throughout it, fans have the feeling of a club that are moving in the right direction again, that there's a discernible way of playing, that there's a process in place, that it looks like the players are buying into it. Just that the direction of travel is positive, that you have the sense that with this guy in charge, improvements are going to be made and you're going to be getting better and better over time, rather than this feeling of like, sort of standing still and just sort of treading water, or just that you're operating in a very short-term kind of way, which I think was the sense most had with Conte. So again, I know that feels maybe less tangible than what some fans want or demand. But to me, I think success, let's say Spurs finish 6th finish 6th next season, but they do it playing football that really thrills the fans, and clearly the players are bought into it, and there's a real sense that we're moving in the right direction. I think that can be a successful season. Likewise, they could come 4th, but if it's all a bit chaotic and some of the players are sounding off and it doesn't really feel like a United dressing room or United fan base, which is unlikely, I guess, because if you're coming 4th, you probably would be pretty happy. But
well, yeah, you say that. But if we'd have done it under Conte this season, I think all of us would have felt a little bit like, well, was that a good season? Even though on paper it was.
Yeah, totally. So I think it is a bit more, my view anyway, and every fan will have their own view. That, to me, is the most important thing. That's what I think success looks like. Just having everyone, that triangulation of fans, of players and manager, all feeling united and putting in the right direction. Because it's been so long, really, in any sustained way. Yeah, there have been moments of it, but we haven't had that in a sustained way since Pochettino left.
100% agree with you. I read an article this morning about Leonardo Gabbanini, and it talks about his rise in influence behind the scenes since Paratici was let go. What can you tell us about him? Like, he was apparently directly involved in Vicario signing.
Yeah, so Gabbanini, I've reported on him a few times. I did a big piece on kind of everything that was going on at Spurs in all departments back in April, and he came up a bit in that. So he basically, since Paratici's gone, the two most prominent people in that department are Gabbanini and Greta Steinson. Greta Steinson is more strategic in his role. Gabbanini is more kind of heading up the scouting operation. So Gabbanini has a team of people working into him. And he was pretty closely aligned with Paratici before he went. From what I understand, Gabbanini is pretty forthright. He is pretty direct in his dealings. He has a wide network, as you'd expect from someone like that. He was at Watford before. So obviously the way Watford operate under the Pozzo network, and they've got all their links in Italy. So that's a market he knows very well. So yeah, again, someone like Vicario, that's going to be a player that's very familiar to him.
Is his main focus in Italy, or does he have a global?
I'd say it's global, but that's a market he's going to know that he does know very well, given his experience, where he's from, the sort of contacts that he's developed. Obviously, what will be interesting is we've got Scott Munn to start permanently on July the 1st, and both Steinson and Gabbanini will report into him, as Paratici would have done. And there's the director of football, which we'll probably talk about still to come as well. So to be fair to Daniel Levy, for a club that for a long time was kind of madly thin, really, when it came to people in senior positions making these kind of decisions, over the past couple of years, not only did Paratici come in, but you've had Steinson come in as performance director, Gabbanini, Andy Scolding, Simon Davis has come in, and he's now heading up the academy, Scott Munn. So that's quite a lot of pretty big ticket appointments into important roles. I guess the key thing is, yes, but how much autonomy do they actually have? And that's the $1 million question.
Probably something we'll never know. It was much too simplistic for Spurs fans, myself included, when we were sort of angry at finding ourselves in a situation where we had no manager or no head coach, no director of football, and seemingly no direction. But in actual fact, there are people in place behind the scenes that can do these jobs without Paratici being there. Obviously, we've got a manager in Postecoglou. The DOF stuff seems to have gone quiet. Are we actively looking for someone to take over? I know it's a role that's notoriously difficult to fill because people are in jobs. The ones that are really good are in long-term positions at their football club. There is a couple of big names around that could potentially take over. But what do you know, if anything, of our search for a new DOF?
Yeah, that is ongoing, but it is slightly surprising that we're where we are, and it hasn't been an appointment. Though, as you say, it's not an easy appointment to get right. There aren't many people who could do the job, because it does require both a level of skill, but also a kind of force of personality to head up that team. Like, it's such an important position for any club. That said, I mean, Paratici, part of what he wanted to do was create a team that meant, there were people there who were empowered to do the job as well. So you do have people like Steinson and Gabbanini, and a whole team of scouts working into them and various other people at the club. And they've obviously been working away over the last few months. Targets were identified a long time ago while Paratici was still there. So yeah, it's not like they've just been sitting on their hands not doing anything. But clearly it's a massive appointment to get right. I mean, ideally they wanted that to be sorted before the head coach was sorted. Obviously that didn't happen because you do run the risk of having a director of football and a head coach who aren't as aligned, which is obviously what you want. But there was a flurry of activity whenever it was, a few weeks ago, a month ago maybe, and it has gone quiet. But they are trying.
Michael Edwards doesn't have a job. Is there anything there?
That's not one I've heard directly. I mean, that's the thing. There are these sort of few kind of celebrity directors of football that everyone knows about, like Monchi and I mean, Paratici, to be fair, was arguably one of them. But...
I was speaking to Nima. You might know him. He does the Italian football podcast, and he was.
I know who he is.
Yeah, he was saying that Paratici's reputation in Italy was. I mean, it might have been in part due to his misdoings, let's say, but he didn't have a great reputation as a functioning DOF. But as at Spurs, we sort of herald him as one of the very few truly positive things to have happened in the last 4 or 5 years. It was a bit of a strange one. I was surprised to hear that from him, but
So No, I think there was like a it depends who you speak to. I think generally his reputation was pretty good, but by the end he'd been there a long time, and the reality is you are going to have some misses as well as hits because it's not an exact science. But he's still, I think generally his time at Juventus, given how good they were, was considered to be pretty successful.
Is there a world where Eric Dyer and Sanchez start a game for Tottenham next season, Charlie? Tell me you've heard that we're actively trying to sell both of them.
I don't think the two of them.
One of them.
Sanchez, Sanchez, they certainly would be very open to offers for. And then it just comes down to where those offers come from and for how much. I don't think they're going to get much for him.
I mean,
to be brutally honest.
Is there any risk that we just sever our contract?
Let's go down the Serge Aurier route. I mean, they do need to thin the squad. I think that will be a conversation. The terminating contracts for a number of the players. I mean, the squad is so bloated, and they're not in Europe, and they need to bring players in. So you're looking at like double figures, at least, of the players they want to get rid of. So maybe that becomes a conversation later on in the window. Dyer's a tricky one. I mean, he's only got a year left on his contract, and it wouldn't surprise me if it suited everyone for him to stay and then go next summer. But because again, with his age and the fact that he does only have a year left, I can't imagine they're going to be offered a huge amount for him.
No.
So yeah.
I mean, I think we as Spurs fans, we looked at that centre back role, especially when we're playing three at the back, and you're thinking, well, we need a lot. We need at least two. I think we still need two at the back, even if we're playing a back four. I've never really seen Romero in a back four, and I know he may have played that role in Italy, but certainly in England, he's never been asked of him to do that, or very rarely. And I don't think Dyer, from what I've seen, can play in a back four. I don't think he's fast enough or dynamic enough. So I feel like we need at least two centre backs. But what do you think will come in? We've been linked with a lot.
I think Spurs will ideally bring in two centre backs. One in the mould of Clement Longley, and it could even be Clement Longley in a kind of backup sort of option, and then more of a first choice, Edmund Tapsoba.
What do you make of him?
I haven't seen a huge amount of him, but I hear very good things.
Yeah.
And you know that he's right-footed, I believe, but plays as a left-sided centre back, and that's what Spurs have been looking for so long. You know that left-sided centre back has become such an important position over the last few years because of how much teams want to play out, and Spurs just haven't had that. I think it has been an issue. There's a wider issue in that you're trying to evolve from playing three at the back to playing at four, and a number of players, like you say, are more comfortable in the three. I think of Dyer, Romero, someone like Ben Davis, probably Clement Longley, and then a bunch of the wing backs. You know, are more wing backs than full backs. So that is something that is going to have to be addressed in a big way this summer. I
know, it feels like so much to do. We did have a question from Top Spur. It wasn't really a question, it was just like a demand. Ask him about Tapsoba and Maddison. We talked a bit Tapsoba. Just quickly, I've watched him on YouTube, and he does look like the best centre-back I've ever seen in the history of the game. He carries the ball, he's quick, he looks like a midfielder in centre-back, so I think that'd be a great signing. We should absolutely do it based on that 4-minute YouTube video. But Maddison has been just an ongoing rumbling story. We heard, and I don't know how much faith you have in ITK, is probably zero, right? But we obviously, the podcast is relatively well known, and so we get fed information. 99.9% of it ends up being utter bollocks. But Maddison, we heard there was almost an agreement in place last season while the football was still being played, and that he'd agreed and wanted to come to Tottenham, regardless of what seemed to be happening there. Now, it's been rumbling on. It does feel like one of these things that will get over the line. What do you think of it?
Yeah, my understanding is that talks are ongoing between the clubs and that they're not especially close at this point to reaching an agreement. Bear in mind, Leicester wants 60 million for a player who's out of contract.
They may want that. They may want that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what they're holding out for. And as ever, there'll be lots of negotiations, but that's quite a high bar to try and get them down from. So yeah, that's basically where it is right now. But I think there is the appetite to get it done, but they have a limit. I mean, look at David Raya. That was a player they wanted. In the end, the price point was too high for a player also out of contract next summer. So they pivoted elsewhere. I mean, this is a player they've liked for a really long time, even since he was back at Coventry. And I remember, last summer there were whispers that they might go for him. In the end, they didn't. There's Newcastle, who are also there in the background, potentially going to make a move. My understanding at the moment is that that's less likely. But yeah, I mean, that's one. I think everyone would love to see that done. I would love to watch him every week. I think he's a phenomenal player.
I would too. I'm kind of sometimes, obviously, as a fan, you want the clubs to just spend the money, get the player in, so we can rebuild. But you don't want to have your pants pulled down, because it really restricts what you can do elsewhere.
Yeah.
We do need these centre backs. There isn't an infinite amount of money to spend. Even Chelsea now, look at them fire selling their players, because they have to find some balance to what they did last summer. And in January. So we're in this situation where Leicester cannot demand £60 million for James Maddison when they're relegated and he has a year left on his contract. If anyone goes in there and spends that, it's either they're state-backed or mental. It's not a fair price. The same with Porro. I think we had not that he's not a good player, he's a good player, but he's not £45 million good at this stage. And I think that there felt like there was a pressure to make sure we got him in, and we probably overpaid for him. You can't continue to do that unless, like you say, you're banked by infinite wealth.
Yeah, it has a knock-on effect as well, doesn't it? Because then everyone looks at it and it's like, oh, this club overpays.
Yes.
Great, we'll just hold out for more with our player. So you do have to be careful, even as and also, as much as the same people who'll be like, why just pay what they want for Maddison? But then if that means you can't get a centre back, and then say, why can't we get a centre back?
So, you forget very
because
quickly.
You've overpaid.
Yes, exactly. But it's it's your fans' prerogative just to shout into the void and hope someone listens. Any other centre backs that we have been linked with? Just quickly, is it Tapsoba? But anything likely? Do you think?
There's Tosin as well at Fulham, who they like. Mark Gay is someone again they've liked for I remember being told about him probably 2 summers ago. They liked him. So those are in the mix. I mean, I know Harry Maguire was mentioned earlier on in the window. That was never one that I heard was ever particularly far along. And imagine he'd be a fairly divisive player to bring in. But that is a priority. But we've seen so many times before that we get bogged down early on in the window with targets that have been mentioned, that have been linked. And there are so many reasons why a player might be linked with the club. And then someone comes in from left field. I mean, look at Vicario, really. Yeah. That was not someone that was being heavily trailed. Most Spurs fans probably hadn't heard of him 48 hours ago.
Absolutely not. But I do believe that he is the best goalkeeper in Europe currently. He's although, do you know what? Jose Mourinho would talk to him about him, saying he was an incredible goalkeeper. Many clubs in Serie A were looking at him. I don't know if is he like. I had a question about him. Is this our number one signing? Is this so? It wasn't Raya, and now we've shifted towards him because he's cheaper, and that this is our solution for the goalkeeping situation for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think he is. He's the number one. He'll come in as the number one. And yeah, that's the thing. David Raya seemed like a safe bet because he's Premier League experienced and he's so good. Obviously, there's a degree of risk when you bring in someone. This guy's only been playing top flight football for a couple of seasons. He's 26, which for a keeper is relatively young. But from people I've been speaking to who know his game pretty well, they think this is a really good price that Spurs have got. I think he's got a huge amount of potential. As you mentioned that, Juve were interested in him. Inter, if Onana was to go, this was someone they wanted as a replacement. So big clubs, this guy is really well thought of. I think the position Spurs are in, they need to be smart. They need to sign players before they get to the David Raya level almost. Because once they're there, they become, a couple of seasons as a Premier League player. And your price is just ridiculous these days. So, and Spurs aren't in Europe. So they need to get some of these signings right. And to be fair, under Paratici, you look at Romero cost a lot of money, but Bentancur and Kulusevski were very well priced.
Definitely. We end up paying 26 million, but paid over 6 years. It's almost
plus a loan. There was a decent loan fee, but yeah, even so, it's brilliant business for Kulusevski.
There has been a shift behind the scenes, apparently, about us being much more data driven, like a la Brentford and Brighton, and everyone heralds how well they recruit players. What does that look like at Spurs in your understanding? Is this signing of this goalkeeper partly down to that sort of new method?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and Postecoglou as well. That was they look at that. All the things about how his teams play and that kind of thing. Yeah, there's definitely a big move towards this. And that's pretty common in modern football. Everything is known about these players. So their style. So with the goalkeeper, for instance, and even the piece that went up this morning by me and a couple of my colleagues on The Athletic, you can benchmark him and look at how he plays, who he plays like, and that can be on the sort of level that we're operating on, which is less sophisticated. Average passes, average pass length, even basic things like average passes per game. And it's interesting looking at his numbers compared to Lloris, and there is quite a big difference. Just how much more trusted Vicario is on the ball. And at Empoli last season, what they would often do, play goal kick, a defender would play a goal kick to him, and then he can distribute.
Wow.
Which United tried to do with De Gea this season, and then basically abandoned it because it was like he can't really do it. And I can't imagine Lloris do it. I think that would be a bit of a disaster zone with Lloris.
Why wouldn't the fullback be able to play that ball? It's just that this goalkeeper is better.
I think it's just angles.
Right.
He's got more angles, and so one of the things Vicario could do well is play passes between the lines to midfielders, find his wide men, that sort of thing. So. I think he'll feel like a big step up from Lloris, and it feels bad. I feel like I'm sort of dissing an ex or something. Lloris was brilliant for so long for Spurs, but I just think he became a bit outdated by the end.
Yeah, he was a bloody liability. I mean, I can say I appreciate everything you've done, but he's we had zero faith in and you could see. I think even when he signed that contract, the last contract, it was almost like Conte. They had Conte, and it kind of felt like there may be another last hurrah for it, but it was just clear that he was done, and we felt so much more secure with Fraser Forster there, and it feels like now we have a 1 and 2 that, because I have no issue with Fraser Forster playing for Tottenham at all. I feel comfortable with that. Just a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap this up if that's okay. Mm-hmm. Jack Doyle 82, he says, is left back something the club are looking at, with Reguilon and Perisic looking like they'll leave, Udogie having no experience, and Davies getting ripped to shreds against Brentford? There's no obvious contender at the start of the season. However, just to add something to that, we do have an abundance of players that can play in this area of the pitch, so maybe are we not looking to adapt some of that talent that we already have? We can't buy another fullback, surely.
Yeah, I think there are too many other priority areas. Because, you've got Sessegnon, Davis, Udogie,
Reguilon,
Perisic. Someone like Tanganga can fill in there. There are so many players who can play left back. Yeah. Reguilon, of course, yeah.
He is a left back as well. He's like a...
Yeah. I mean, Reguilon, I expect, will be moved on. I think Perisic could go as well. I don't think that's really worked out.
What's his role this season? If it's not left back, it's got to be as a left winger or forward.
Yeah.
Is he going to press?
I guess almost like a sort of deluxe utility sub, because I can't see him really starting many games, because there's not an obvious position for him now.
I'd have him on the bench. He can still do it. He's got 11 assists last season. It's a high number, but having him on the bench as a forward player, it's not a bad option, but it's certainly not a left back option.
No, exactly. So I don't think that's not something at the moment anyway. You know what often happens like with transfer windows is then at the end, maybe there's like a surprise player pops up in a surprise position, but that's not a priority right now.
No, not at all. And what do you think about the right back side of things as well? Because it's a similar situation. You've got Emerson Royale, who is a out and out right back who can play as a wing back, good going forward. You've got Porro, who isn't a right back, but obviously we've paid a lot of money, so we need to make that work. He could play further forward, you'd think. You've got Jed Spence coming back.
Yeah, really, really good options. I mean, Postecoglou likes his fullbacks to invert and be comfortable on the ball in central midfield. I mean, I think someone like Royale could do a really good job. We saw him playing a more central defensive role last season. Porro is an interesting one because, as we saw against Newcastle, him in a back four is a bit of a disaster zone. But I don't think he's a winger. I mean, he is a wing back, basically. That position is perfect for him, but that's not the system we expect Spurs to play with. And that's kind of an example of what's happened a lot with Spurs, that you spend a load of money on a player, and then within a couple of months the guy who he was brought in to play for and whose system he was brought in to play for is gone. And then it's like, well, what happens now with him? And Jed Spence, I'm really interested to see how he does, because, he was the guy who there was so much excitement about this time last year, and then it just didn't happen for him. And what role does Postecoglou see for him? Does he invert, or does he play more as a kind of attacking fullback? The interesting thing with him is he's a really good defender. I think people think of him as more attacking, but at Forest, they were wowed by how good he was defensively, and in a kind of Wan-Bissaka, no one got past him kind of way.
Was he playing in a back four then?
He played in the back five
Right.
most of the time. Yeah, as in, he was a wing back.
Yeah.
But he can do either. So it'll be interesting to see.
Final question. Tom Jones on Twitter, he says, odds that Kane leaves this window.
Don't know about odds, but I don't think he will go. That's where I'm at right now. It just reminds me a bit of 2 years ago. I know the circumstances are different, because then he had 3 years left on his contract, so Spurs had more power. But all I'm hearing so far is, yes, there are a lot of teams who want him. Of course they do. But I just don't think they're going to pay what's necessary, because they know they can get him for free next year. And so to pay 100 million plus for what will be a 30-year-old, assuming by the time that transfer would actually happen, who has 1 year left on his contract, I don't know. I can't really see that. Maybe someone will come, as you mentioned, nation state owned clubs. Maybe a PSG or someone will come and do that. I know they really like him. But yeah, it just feels a bit like 2 years ago when it's all well and good them trying to unsettle Kane and Kane wanting to go, but ultimately there's a third really important party in that, and that's Spurs, and they're not gonna be hustled into selling him at a cut price. Even if it means he goes next year.
Could you think Daniel Levy could really stomach that? Like, what? I guess
losing him for free.
Yeah, losing him for free, but what damage does it do to his credibility and his somewhat tattered reputation with Spurs fans now if he lets him go? Like, what's Daniel Levy thinking, do you think?
Well, that's what I mean, you'll have a view on this, but to me, ultimately, if Kane goes for free next summer, yeah, of course, everyone will be really upset. But Levy tied him to a 6-year deal. It wasn't like he got him on a short-term contract. He got him to a 6-year deal and then couldn't get him to sign another one. And that is a failing of the club, no question, because clearly if Spurs had been moving in a more positive direction, he would have signed another contract.
Yeah.
But I think that would almost be more palatable than him going this summer and it feeling like, unless it's a crazy offer, obviously, but he's almost invaluable to Spurs, partly because of the emotion of it all. I don't know. I just can't see an amount that really satisfy, for Spurs fans, that they're going to be like, oh, fair play, let's sell it.
We did a pod, and the amount we agreed on was 170 million, which has never come in.
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to happen, not even nearly. So exactly, that gives you a sense of how upset Spurs fans would be, especially if he was sold to another English club.
Yeah. Well, was there any truth in Man United going, you have to put in a transfer mark? That was a big story yesterday, I think, or the day before. He wants him to put in a transfer request. They're demanding that of him.
I don't know. But, I mean, they really like him. They want to sign him. But again, this is what I mean. It just feels a bit like they're all sort of, agitating and trying to get something done. But ultimately, put up or shut up. Like, if United come in with a crazy offer, then maybe they'll get him. But all of that sort of stuff. Kane didn't turn up for training last time. Did it make any difference? No.
Yeah.
And in fairness to Daniel Levy, for all his faults, I think the way he handled that was in the best interest of the club.
Absolutely.
He was kind of like, well, okay, we're still not going to sell you. And sure enough, in a couple of weeks, Kane was back and playing for Spurs.
And just to see one more season in this new sort of attacking Postecoglou side, maybe we just have to keep him. All right, thank you, Charlie. Thank you so much. And we will no doubt speak in a year from now when we've got a new manager and everything else is completely fucked again. But thanks a lot, mate. Cheers.
Cool. Thanks so much, mate.